Welcome back, Marvels. How in the heck are you? Dana and I are back for another episode. Hi, Dana.
How you doing, Gwen?
Good.
You said, how the heck you doing? And then I thought, heck. And into my head popped, deck the halls, because we're getting close to holiday. And then I thought about presents, and presents are gifts, and our topic is gifted.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the label of gifted. How is that for rapid finding?
Wow. By the way, if you were ever wondering what's diagnosable, Dana just described it.
Those are the kinds of things that I'll get clients come and they tell me that they do. And they're like, oh, yeah. I wonder if I'm autistic. And I'm like, yeah.
Or I mean, like,
yeah.
I mean, it's just so funny, like the way, you know, as I'm like rethinking, and I know we're not talking about this in this episode, but like I've been really thinking about the way, how I've been thinking about the autism category in general and the evolution of that. And it's so funny because none of it is related to the DSM. Like if I were to think about the patterns of functioning, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the social aspects. It's not the repetitive behavior. It's not any of those. It's like I go to sensory and a way of thinking and like, and I also, for me, it's like this, even like alongside the way of thinking, it's just even, you know, overthinking, thinking about all of it, and that's what leads to the exhaustion. Anyway, that's another
I love that though, because to me, that's what's really at the base of it. And when when the DSM says social issues, I think those are the things that feed into social issues. So social issues are not the primary issue. It's these other things. Yeah. And so you're sort of treating one schism over, and it's, that's not where the focus should be.
Yeah, I just awesome. Don't think about it that way. I mean, but like speaking of, we're talking about presents and gifts, and so Dana's beautiful mind goes to gifted, which is what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah.
And this gifted idea it's so interesting because in my work, I'm usually supporting twice exceptional and thrice exceptional students. Or
can you define those teens for
me
and the audience?
So like twice exceptional means that there's an exceptionality in two ways. One is that we've got part of our IQ at this very, very high level. And we're really looking at that. Usually it's like two kind of standard deviations. I'll just say this kind of generally, two standard deviations above like average. So we're really looking at like 130s and higher, right? Like that is on an IQ measure. And that's, that's really like 98th percentile, meaning like that person in that category compared to their peers, their score is in the top 2% of those people. Okay.
Gotcha.
Twice exceptional means though that there's then this split with another thing that is way under average. So we see this separation where, so let's say, when we think about the classic way that, that IQ has been assessed, we usually talk about the Wechsler scales. But that full scale score is a combination or an algorithm of other scores, right? We've got a verbal kind of reasoning, the way we kind of reason with language. We've got a nonverbal reasoning or perceptual reasoning, the way we kind of reason with spatial things, right? We've got how quickly our minds can work for rote kinds of tasks. We've got how much our mind can juggle for working memory, right? And so we've got these kind of categories of functioning. And so a lot of times with twice exceptional students or individuals, you'll see, these sky high scores maybe in verbal reasoning, but then you see the processing speed just like in the 80s. And you just see this split.
Why do they call it twice exceptional? You think they'd call it like we call a split, or we learned that, because one of them isn't exceptional. So why do they call it
That's right. Well, it's exceptional in the other way. It's exceptional in the way in which it's under. And
because not a lot of people have that split. For the audience to know, it's unusual when you can see a split and a difference between what we call verbal IQ and performance IQ, but if it's a far enough distance apart, it's remarkable. And in this case, exceptional. Okay, twice exceptional.
Right. So, and and Dana, that's just is that significant number is 22.
And I bet I would have come out that way if I was tested as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you see this. So, and if you've got 22 points between any of your kind of composite scores, that's like that happens in like less than 1% of the sample population. I mean, like that's a distinct separation.
Yeah.
But we'll see it. We'll see someone with a verbal IQ, let's say a verbal reasoning score of 140 something, and then we'll see their processing speed as an 82. And we just kind of know the problem.
And for the audience to know, so these little pieces that you're talking about that are built into this test that have evolved over the years, by the way, to try to get a better bead on the metrics of how the people that make the test define intelligence, first of all. But things like processing speed, so those are tests that are timed. So we want to know under the gun, how well do you do this? And not everybody is good at it under the gun, right? And some people are. But you can have those, like if you know you're under the gun, now all of a sudden you can't do anything that you normally do, right? Your attention isn't there. So like in ADHD, sometimes that gets affected. So there's all these different kinds of numbers that we can look at when we get an intelligence test, besides just what we call that full scale IQ, that number that lay people are like, oh, what number are you? And I'm like, but there's so many other metrics that we look at that feed into that overall number. And you're just mentioning a few of those, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you do have any kind of item or composite split at that level, you don't use in full scale IQ.
Yeah.
Because it's a mushy number. Right? It's just a mushy number. It's like you got a high number, a low number, you got something in the middle. That doesn't really describe the way in which you reason with information. And, the WACE is a very verbal, language heavy test. And so for those individuals that, have a difficult time with expressive language or language in general, that is not a test to be using in regards to measuring IQ, which you and I have spoken about how IQ is quite a loaded and kind of term anyway, right?
It's a really, it's skewed culturally. It's like you said, if someone isn't good at verbal skills, there are some other tests we can give that are nonverbal, but what if the person is anxious and they're just not comfortable relating to this person, saying, replicate these symbols that are on the screen, or figure out this trick when we give you these cards and they change the rule, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean someone is dumb or not worthwhile as a human because their quote IQ isn't at a certain place. So there's all kinds of marginalization that can take place. We want to preface it with that. But typically, so you work with kids and teens, that's the label of gifted is typically with the IQ test? Is that how gifted gets assigned?
Most, I will say like Mensa uses, I think it's a 140 something and over.
Yeah.
A lot of schools will use that 98th percentile kind of place. But you do need to test into a gifted program if you're looking at like a public school or many private schools, a formal IQ measure will be required. I think what's so challenging though is that, and I see a lot of that, we're working memory, how much you can think about at one time, processing speed, how fast you can think about rote kinds of things. When those are the lower scores, when you've got people that can really reason beautifully when given the time, when given the right environment, I see that to be a setup for chronic stress because how their IQ or how their performance, how anyone's IQ or performance is measured is an output. So speed and working memory tend to kind of really impact the way in which we show what we know. And so there's just a chronic stress to that. And it's kind of a trap because if you can think about way more than you can execute reliably and easily and efficiently, you're anxious, you're stressed. It's hard. And so I think
and anxiety will affect those timed tests. It'll make you think about doing a math problem under the gun. Now all of a sudden you're like, and if you've got processing speed issues on top of that, that's going to affect that big time. Yeah.
And I mean, I think this is where the quote unquote unmotivated or lazy diagnosis or like that label can come in because people see the potential They see how this can, they have glimmers of that. And then when they don't perform to that level, then of course the only answer could be that they're lazy or unmotivated, right?
I have a client of mine that gave me something she had learned about the label of lazy. She's like, if it were laziness, you'd be enjoying yourself. Like if you're lazy and you're trying to avoid doing stuff and you get away with doing nothing, you'd be happy. But typically, like I got called lazy a lot in school before I started to do well, like, oh, doesn't pay attention to homework and those kinds of things. And I was suffering. I was like, I just don't get it. I don't understand how people track all these things. How do you know when things are due and the time kinds of things? And if I got frustrated by something I didn't know, I would just give up. It wasn't laziness. It was frustration and feeling stupid. Laziness had nothing to do with it. So yeah, I love that trick to look at that. Are you having fun? Of course not. Then it's probably not laziness. And then you need to drill further. Yeah. But that marginalized label, and in a way, the label of giftedness can be marginalizing for kids that aren't labeled that. But then also it is a lot of pressure, even if you get put into a gifted program. What if you don't perform? What if you're not doing as well as your peers? Or there are other areas that you're really good at and other areas that you're only sort of good at. And then you get that perfectionistic sort of compulsive thing stroked, which could be problematic too, right?
Yeah. And I think the problem is that, and Dana, you experience this with your students probably, is, when they get to the collegiate level, when you leave IDEA or the protection of IDEA, if you're supported under an IEP, right? You leave the district, you leave IEP support, you go to college, and now it's ADA. If your lowest score is still average, even though your highest score is in the 140s, let's just say you have that split.
Yeah.
That is a very difficult argument for getting accommodations at the collegiate level under ADA because your lowest score is still average.
Gotcha.
So this is where the twice exceptional student, it really suffers. I have a colleague of mine, this amazing colleague of mine, who is currently researching thrice exceptional.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask you what that is.
Thrice, meaning I'm gifted, or I've got a very, very high score in one of areas of my IQ or testing. I've got a low discrepancy, a significant one, more than 22 points away from that, and I belong to a marginalized group of people. So now we've got thrice exception because there's another layer to this. And, you can't, like in the school setting, you can't use a Wechsler test on a Black student.
Right, because it's just not culturally appropriate. Yeah.
And that's a law. That's a legal issue. That has not been overturned. And so what happens for students that need IQ testing under an IEP in the United States, they're going to be using a different measure.
Oh, okay.
A Black student,
like a Connors or some other sort of
usually like a DOS differential ability scale, or there's like other ones, but they're just not as strong as a Wechsler. And the Wechsler tests have been updated with more expanded normed populations. So it just the law hasn't caught up to it yet.
And you talk about in college. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, just a lot of students will go outside for external testing so that they can actually be tested by, probably a better measure, even though there's still a lot of cultural difference and bias.
Yeah, and I'll get accommodations from students that, and almost 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, it's usually needing extra time, or needing the lecture notes ahead of time, or, accessible, a PDF that's scanned need to be able to be readable so they can take that in, not just reading it, but hearing it, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But I was I was set up looking towards the lower left-hand corner of my screen because my computer has some articles in my queue to read and make memes for about the abysmal state of accommodations and understanding in terms of ADA in higher ed. Not just for students, but for people working there, but particularly for students. And it's perpetuated by the people that are working there, that faculty and administration at the college level are, I think the words are woefully, this is in a peer-reviewed article, woefully unsuited and unprepared, and they just don't know what they're doing. and it just makes me sick, right? So you do have potentially all these supports going through high school, even if they're something like, you can't use a waste and you have to put other sort of things in place. And then that all just falls out, like you said, into that larger bucket of ADA. It's not a specific. And then you're really fighting stigma because professors are pretentious. Something I can say? Or are you going to have to bleep that out twice?
I'll just take
who are like, well, you shouldn't be here. And I see this all the time, even with people that I work with, that implicit bias against somebody who needs those accommodations is so strong. It's so big. It's so maddening. I mean, sometimes when I've really gotten frustrated with people I work with, I'm like, bleh! The ableism there is so big. And particularly if it's an invisible disability, right? If it's something they can't see, they just don't recognize it. And I can imagine if you went to a large university and you're like in a lecture room with 200 people, you're going to get lost even more. You're not going to have every professor try to hold you and make sure you're okay and get your accommodation needs met. It's just not going to happen.
Well, let's kind of go back to the thrice exception, right? So let's say you are a Black student in the United States that needs that is under an IEP. And let's say you are headed to a university or a college, no matter what, right? A community college, 4-year, doesn't matter, right? But you're going to college after, that college is going to require testing in order for you to qualify for accommodations with DSPS. Okay, great. But under the IEP, if you're a Black student, you were not able to be tested with a Wechsler, which is what actually colleges want. Is sometimes they require a certain type of testing or certain testing to say this is legitimate, this is okay. So sometimes they don't accept that DOS, let's just say. So now the student has to go seek assessment outside.
And that's expensive. Yeah.
And pay for I mean, psycho ed assessments, here in California, they start at $5,000 to $6,000.
Wow, we don't require testing. We just ask for a note from some sort of provider that says what the accommodations should be. So the barrier but you're talking about a much bigger barrier. Holy cow.
So different universities, and maybe they're changing, but I will say
because we're not state funded, maybe it's different because we're private. Maybe the state schools, the larger universities, maybe that's a thing they have to do.
Yeah, there's some requirements for different universities. I mean, and if you're going a lot of times when you're going here in California to a community college, let's say, your IEP, your exit IEP, which is why I say to families, your exit IEP is one of the most important IEPs you will ever have because it's the last legal document that ushers you into your adult life. Most teams kind of consider the exit IEP like a wash, it's just like a wash, oh yay, bye, here are cupcakes and balloons, see ya, peace out. But that's the IEP that I'm really talking to parents about. Do not, under any circumstances, sign that without reviewing it and making sure that the types of supports and accommodations are clearly defined in that document. And so a lot of times, going to a community college, that's a workaround. You can go to a community college with your IEP, get your accommodations, and then you can transfer into, a different university after you get some of your prereqs. But if you need accommodations, you're still going to need testing. Wow. So this is kind of the landscape. And I will say the collegiate accommodations are abysmal because it does fall under ADA, which really, you and I both know there's probably no more than 3 to 4 real accommodations at the collegiate level. And most of our students need more than that or something else.
And my guess would be that that's economic driven because of those systems. They don't want to have to pay for it. They don't want to, and it's just this institutionalized ableism coming out. If you're in college, you should be able to do these things by now, right? Somehow there's this magic cliff that only the people that can function at a certain level are the ones that get to come and stay and not get any help. And then it goes back to that whole idea of being labeled gifted, which my experience, and you can correct me otherwise, my experience has been folks that find out later who are autistic and sort of did well in school, they're the ones that are saying, oh yeah, I was labeled gifted. It seems like that's a common thing, especially with girls, right? Who are autistic, they get labeled as gifted. I hear my story less, which was the really, who's probably a little bit dyslexic and didn't have a sense of systematic thinking then, took a while. But I hear more stories about giftedness. In boys, particularly if there's a dual diagnosis with the ADHD, they're not the ones that are making it into gifted programs. In fact, they're the ones that are being more marginalized because of the, visual behavioral issues and those kinds of things. But that doesn't automatically a golden ticket up and out and through, and you're going to be great because of these issues that we're sort of talking about. Not to mention, there is some social stigma attached to being a gifted kid, especially if you're at one of those schools where you leave to go to the gifted classes and then you have to intermingle with the non-gifted kids most of the time. I had a person I was talking to yesterday about that and the trauma that they ensued from getting bullied around, being bussed out twice a week or whatever it was to go to this gifted program. Within the gifted program, didn't get bullied because they were all a bunch of nerds, and understood that. But there is a lot of that there. At the collegiate level too, if you do have an ADA accommodation, there's also a lot of fear and shame around that where folks have it. I've had so many students that have said, oh, I know I could get it, but I don't want to do it because you're going to think less of me. Or I do have it in place, but you have to invoke it every quarter with our DSS office. I don't want to do that in case what if I don't need it? And I'm like, you're not going to run around with a broken leg and hope that it mends, but that's also coming from me and their experiences of being marginalized and being seen as the other and not being heard are significant and real, as evidenced by these articles that I'm finding that it's so terribly done, right? And if you've been labeled gifted, now you're struggling. Everybody's going to be like, well, what's the problem? What happened? Why aren't you doing well? Some of these things.
What's the matter with you? You don't want it? Like you don't want.
Yeah, you're lazy.
You don't want it. You're lazy.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's where that comes in. And it's I think on the show we talk a lot about like gather a lot of adjectives. Like don't use one label. And this kind of goes back to our conversation about like first person, versus like person-centered or identity first versus like person-centered language, like these types of things, right?
Yeah.
It's like people are a mix of multiple adjectives. And the giftedness, and it could be a giftedness in one area. Like it's not unusual for someone to be highly verbal and be able to reason verbally and really, really struggle in math.
Yeah.
It's there's pulls there, like, right? Like this is in existence. And so part of it is back to knowing who the person really is, right?
Yeah.
If you're a parent listening to this, it's like, how do I understand my kid? Whether they're 5, 15, 21, or 40. How do I understand my child and how they work?
Yep.
And what are the best environments for them to be in? I think the more away from the neuromajority you fall, the harder it is to be in life. Like I'm seeing that more and more, you and I talk a lot, right? About what is neurotypical, what is neurodivergent, and what's in the middle of that, because we're all like, it's like,
and it's not a single dimension. It can be, you could be neurodivergent in one aspect and not in another, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like, let's not make it linear. Like, let's make it 3D and I imagine like a mind map, you pull up, like a Sherlock Holmes, mind map or mind palace or something. And you pull that up and you can like rotate it or
turn it around.
Turn it around. And it's, it's more in that way. And so let's not just hang our hats on one area, on one word and, and make all of our expectations based on that.
Exactly. Yeah. Come back to that label idea. It only tells you so much. And then you have to get, like you said, use your adjectives and use descriptions of what's really going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know, man. That's it, Dana. We did it.
All right.
I liked how Dana's like,
oh, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's just a lot. It really is. All right, everyone. Have a great, you probably, Dana, people might be getting this right around the holidays. I mean, we're
Yeah,
there.
have a mediocre day. That's okay too. If you're having a really crappy day, we're very sorry, but
have a
get through
day.
it.
Just have a day.
A day. Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Most importantly, though, be good to you. That's the most important part.
And above all, be good to you. Yeah.
Be good to you.
Regardless of the kind of day you're having. Yeah.
Yeah, no matter what. Right. All right, everyone. See you in the next episode. Bye.